to do that. And
I keep all my comments clean.
yeah. But yeah, tonight we have John Miner with us. That he's going to be talking about. The title of the presentation is "Moving on Up to the
Eh,
Azure Cloud."
yeah,
That's
exactly. And
that takes me
I
back
can't.
to one of my favorite shows many years ago.
It's funny. We're going to segue to that pretty soon.
Yeah. But John is a senior data architect for Insight Digital Innovation, and he has over 30 years of data processing experience, and encompasses all phases of the software project lifecycle. And we were chatting quite a bit here before we started about the good old days. And
Yep.
so,
And I worked with Bill Lesher, so.
oh yeah, yeah, our past president.
Cool. Do you have any meeting notices you want to talk about before we begin, or the time's now? If not, I can take over and share the slides and go for it.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and do that? Oh, well, I should ask Jared. Do you have anything you want to talk about?
I do not. Thank you. I think we're good to go.
All right,
Excellent.
take it
I
away,
might
John.
skip a potato chip here and there. It's past 7 o'clock and I didn't eat yet. So, on that, this is a very small, informal group, so I'll try to keep it informal. Have any questions, just raise the hand. I'll stop. I don't have the ability to share, so if you can give that to me, Ross, I think we'll be going to go.
Okay, actually, I thought you had that, but I'll take care of that. Go to meeting options here.
Yep.
Okay, try it now.
Still don't have a share button. Do you want me to log out and log back in? I can dial right back in a minute.
No, that's
You're the only organizer. I am still a attendee. So you have to promote me.
yeah, I had actually thought I'd done that.
Yeah.
But what is, I said, who can present? And I said specific people, and I said you. So we're just going to change it to everyone.
Okay.
And hopefully that won't backfire.
Hey, there we go.
All
Now I
right.
can do it. Awesome. Okay, you're seeing my screen right here. Like I said, it's going to be informal. So if you have a question, just tell me, hey, John, I got a question. Okay. Am I an expert at PostgreSQL? And me and Ross were talking about that. I'm a jack of all trades, I like to say. I've been doing this for 30 years, got a master's degree in it. I've seen a lot, I've done a lot. I've probably forgotten a lot, more than I know.
Yeah.
I was just talking about Mark because it was pretty interesting. He was like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna make this, Windows patching like Unix," and that never happened. So Microsoft does say a lot of things. I do like it when they come up with something new that really works. Uh, I'm extremely pleased that today is Thursday, right? So yesterday I was renewed as an MVP. It means I get some Azure credits to do all the fun stuff that I like writing about and playing with. I do have a passion for learning. Two things you probably wanted to bookmark. One is this one, I can put it right in the thing. This is 3 articles I wrote on MS SQL tips, and they're specifically around Postgres. So there's one on, hey, how do I configure Postgres on the Azure virtual machine? There's another one that says, hey, how do I deploy and set up the current version, which they call Again, this is where I get old. It's not serverless, but it's something. We'll get to it once I show you the page. And then last but not least, this one goes over kind of what we're going to talk about today, which is how do we convert a schema from one to another? It's basically a migration. If I wanted to go from like Oracle or from SQL Server to Postgres, how do I do it? So I will paste that into, if I can find it, and go here. Nope. It's always fun of trying to do Windows and Windows. This guy, right? Okay, here we go. Here's my chat up top. Okay, give control. Stop sharing. I'm going to stop sharing for 1 second so I can give you this and put it in here. So the first thing is if you want to know some information more than what I'm telling you, like, hey, what's cron? Try this PG cron, or is there a different way to do it? And Linux versus, Unix. Go take a look at the articles. It tells you a little about that. Another one is I have a GitHub repo. And everything you're seeing tonight is freely given out there. So if you want to go take a look at it, that's it. I'm going to share again and then we'll get started. Okay, so close that and let's look at our demo. So if you haven't been in Azure, basically I'm using two objects in Azure. One is just a virtual machine, happens to be running SQL. So you can see it's VM SQL 19. I'm behind the times. And there's also one called Server for PG Tips 15. So that's where our database is. So if we click on it, going to be able to tell you what the name of it is because, it's for flexible server. I was thinking of serverless, but it's flexible servers, they call this. And so basically you get to pick when deployment, the version number, and you can tell the configuration. And there's some things in here that are really important that you might want to take a look at. Like for instance, they have basically query database, right? And so you can go ahead and get query performance by turning that on, right? You'll just get, all the monitoring put into the query performance. They also have other packages out there if you don't want the one that Microsoft wrote, okay? There's high availability, which I was talking to Ross about. You can do replication and so on. Nice thing about high availability, push a button, it suddenly works, right? You don't have to do anything. Where was one I wanted to show you? And then we'll get into this is kind of a little out of the thing. Oh yeah, this is the one. So a lot of things they're going to hear is you're going to hear the word extension, and then we'll get into presentation. And this is where you do that right here. These are all the extensions. So you can turn on, like, if you're wondering about PG cron, you could probably go through here. Also, is there a way to do it? You could just say PG_cron, maybe it'll come up. And there you go, cron database name. And so it tells you what it is, right? So you can either turn it on or turn it off. This is where you do all the fun stuff. Okay, so let's get to the demo slides. So it's pretty funny because, Ross definitely has a much better hair looking than I do. But I'm losing some of it. It's a little gray, but I did come up with this title because I was thinking about the Jeffersons, right? Remember the Jeffersons back in the 70s, moving on up to the east side? Well, it's moving on up to the cloud with a PostgreSQL database in the sky. So the question is, why would you want to do that, right? And we'll talk a little about that today. When I grew up, there was 3 70s stations I used to listen to, right? Happy Days, right? All in the Family, and the Jeffersons, right? And so you can go to tinyurl and find out more information about all these 3. But basically, that tinyurl is the theme song for the Jeffersons, and that's how I came up with this presentation name. Okay. So why do people want to go to Postgres? Well, licensing, right? It costs a lot of money, right? Now, the interesting thing is that will it save you money? And the question is, it all depends, right? If you're going to use the flexible service that I just showed you, which is a service, then you're going to get charged that because not only you are using their VMs, but they're doing all the patching, they're doing high availability and stuff, and that comes at a premium cost, right? On the other hand, if you just spin up a VM, you put Postgres on it, you put a database, you open up a couple firewall rules, guess what? It's not going to cost that much. The question again is, how do you get the code over, right? Well, there's a lot of technical pitfalls, like for instance, refactoring the code. Maybe You've been at the company for 30 years, right? And the code, the people that wrote it, no longer there. What does it mean? Who knows, right? So the schema, which is the table, right? And the data, which is what goes in the table, really easy to move, right? It's not a big deal. However, the biggest thing, anything that comes with code, that's basically garbage in, garbage out. If you had great developers, then it's easy to do. If you have bad developers, then it might take a long time to do. The two types of pre-compiled code, basically when you do it, you basically want to decipher it, right? Hopefully it was coded and commented well, but more than likely that's not true. Okay. Also, was it performant? Did someone look at it and say, hey, this performs really well? Or maybe, it was designed bad and it just performs horribly. And if so, you might have to fix that before you move it. Also, if you have something really complex, like maybe business logic in those stored procedures, break it up, try to put debugging, use logging. I love doing internal logging when it comes to stored procedures, right? I have a table, stop this step, it stopped, broke here. Why? You could do profiling using your query store, but the problem is that, when you have those subcomponents, really difficult to find where it went unless you're using a tool like SQL Server Central. Not SQL Server Central, but SentryOne or one of those tools like Redgate. And even then, it's hard to debug it. Just having your own stuff, guess what? You know exactly how long it took in the past. You have a baseline. You can look at the future, okay? So basically, we're going to talk tonight. We're going to do an example of the pubs database. Can anyone tell me when the pubs database came out? For which version of SQL? Anyone want to gander? Ross, you should know. We were talking about it. If everyone's still there?
Yeah, I'm still there. Sorry, I was my wife sent me a text.
No
and
worries.
So you caught me off guard. What was the question?
No worries. I was going to say, do you remember when the pubs database came out?
When the pub database came out. Actually, I remember it, but I don't remember when it came out.
Yep, 6.5.
1995.
It was
Go ahead.
6.5. Okay.
6.5, 7.0, and 2000 were the days in which it was shipped. Yep. And then we'll go over that tonight, right? So what topics do we want to do? What do we want to talk about? How do you migrate, right? First, we're going to have to do an inventory of the database. This is simple. It's the pubs database, right? Also, if it was something that was really big, we'd want to baseline the resource usage. So maybe, do the query store, see what's going on, how much usage, look at your DMVs and so on, right? Next thing is we have to deploy the infrastructure, right? So there's a couple of ways to do it. We'll talk about that. Then moving tables and data, I'll show you a Perl script. I didn't write it. I'm hoping one of these days I have some time, which I never do. Say if I retired. I'd rewrite it in PowerShell because there's a ton of PowerShell out there. It's everywhere. Versus Perl's a pain in the ass to install. It's not that hard, but it's still a pain. And most people know PowerShell versus Perl. Right? How do we redesign the stored code? That's where it's the most complicated issue. Right? It's garbage in, garbage out. And any other topics I want to talk about. So it's interesting that Postgres was based upon Ingress. And it's a professor named Michael Stonebreaker. And he got a bunch of companies like ARPA, Three Letter Words, NSA, so on, give him grants, right? He started in 1986 and it became popular all the way up to the point where they came out with Postgres 95. And before then, the SQL language was not part of the engine. It had its own version of how to query stuff, right? And basically in 1995, they added it and released it as an open source descendant of the original project, right? And this is something that I was talking to Russ about. Things are cyclical, right? And so the problem was initially it was written and it was slow, right? And how do you make things go faster? You write it in a better language that's closer to hardware, right? So if you have in Java, go down a step, write it in Sage, right? Kind of like also Databricks. If you've heard of Spark, they had their engine written in Scala, which is object-oriented Java, and they rewrote it in C++ to go faster. Right? Cool thing they did, which Microsoft kind of didn't do, is they just called it PostgreSQL. It's not like the SQL Server. It's like, hey, I'm going to SQL Server 2022. It's not like V12. It's not SQL Server, the newest version. So they did something interesting, which is, hey, it's just PostgreSQL. Why learn it? Well, the thing is that the market's getting tight. Like, well, I said you have to kind of know a bunch of databases, right, to be on a support team. They're asking more out of everyone, right? So what are the most top 4 databases that are out there? Well, Oracle and MySQL, which MySQL is owned by Oracle, right? Basically, you can see that they're in 1 and 2, right? Microsoft SQL Server is number 3, and basically PostgreSQL is number 4. And basically, I just wanted to learn it, right? I know MySQL already. PostgreSQL has a lot of cool things in it. Don't have enough time to talk about them all tonight, but there's a lot of good stuff there. There's one thing I don't like is the backups. We'll talk about that later. But other than that, it's pretty good product out there. Even Grant's starting to Fritchie's starting to learn it. So, yeah, if you haven't wanted to look at Postgres, take a look. Okay. So I don't care how you're going to do the inventory. We just need some type of inventory, right, to get us started, right? So just ask some questions like how many databases out there, current size versus expected growth. Because when we deploy a new system, say it's a virtual system, even if it's a VM or a service, we have to know what size we're going to deploy out there, right? Also, we want to know what type of storage you need to put it on. Is it something that, needs fast transactions? Or is it something that, eventually if we get the answer, it's great? And if so, we can pick out the storage options, right? Also, you want to know how tightly coupled the databases are, right? So cross database queries, HA, high availability versus DR, right? And additional configurations like, for instance, full text indexing and geospatial features. So there's something called PostgreSQL, and the first time I was introduced to this, and I didn't get a chance to play with the Postgres database back then other than deploy it, is my company about 3 or 4 years ago were bidding on a job for the U.S. Air Force. We never got it, but it was a really cool quote request for information in which they wanted to test the vendor on their technique. And so we paired up with a company that was like rocket scientists. And the problem was, hey, I got a bunch of ships out there, right? The Navy or Air Force. Where is it that they can't get satellite coverage, right? And they basically did that whole thing on a bunch of Linux clusters in PostGIS. So it was kind of cool. Okay. So again, we're still worried about how much we need to deploy for hardware to make the existing stuff work, right? So some things you might want to do is what's the memory usage, right? How much storage is available versus used? What's the IOPS, right? Because we all know that by going to the cloud, things are not faster, right? They're slower, actually. And so if things were poorly written on premise, that insufficient coding or the bad coding is actually going to magnify when it goes to the cloud, okay? Other things, how many connections you have, because connections take some space, not that much. Is there current issues with the system to ask the current users, right? So when possible, there's a bunch of tools out there that you can use. And, if you find one that you like, use it to collect the old data, the old and the new, so that, I always hate when doing a migration and the users come and say, well, it's slower than the previous one. And they're like, how is that? And they have no idea. It's all like, subjective, like they think it's slower versus when you look at the statistics, it might be the same, if not faster. Right? So again, having this information in your back pocket is probably a good idea. Okay. So this kind of shows you like a bunch of stuff out there, and it's funny because I was talking to Ross, and you're moving off what, Amazon Aurora?
Correct.
You can see here that we start at the bottom, right? Infrastructure as a service, and that's just basically deploying VMs, right? So we Microsoft Azure, sure. AWS has EC2 instances, right? Google has something called the Compute Engine, which is just basically a Kubernetes container, right? Then we move up one more level, right? And we can see, oh yeah, platform as a service, right? We have basically RDS, Google Cloud SQL, and SQL can have multiple flavors, including Postgres. We got Microsoft Azure SQL DB. I don't know why they call everything Azure SQL DB. It's really just Microsoft's version in Azure of PostgreSQL as a platform as a service, right? And then we have a bunch of SaaS, right? And so what's the difference? IaaS, you got more control, but guess what? When things break, you're the one responsible to fix them, right? So if you didn't have a backup, then too bad, right? If you're doing platform as a service, well, Microsoft, you signed a contract, they should have a backup, right? Less control, but someone's doing some more work for you. Okay. How do we deploy stuff? I don't know if you work in the cloud or not, but there's three popular things that are going on out there, right? So the first question is it a one-time deployment versus multiple deployments? Like for instance, if I'm just, Ross comes to me and says, "Hey, John, I'm going to come up with something fictitious. We want to figure out the number of prime numbers from 1 to 5 million, which is a simple problem to do. I need a VM to do it. How do you do it? Well, do I just go to the portal and do it one time? That's fine. But the problem is the second time I do it, might not get it the same. Might be a different option I chose, right? So we might want to use a language or framework like GitHub Actions, right? Or Terraform, which has its own, or Azure DevOps, right? And these, okay, have different languages like ARM templates, okay? I'm not going to get into that tonight, but you can take a look. Azure CLI, it's a command line interface. AWS has their code CDX, which is similar to a SDK, and then Terraform, right? And that allows you to manually just say, hey, run the script, and it deploys it for you. And it says, this is the desired state, and it gets it out there, right? But the thing is, you might also want to go from one environment to another, right? And that's where you need pipelines, okay? It's not only the deployment, but the migration of, to different environments, as well as migrating schema changes or data, okay? This is kind of introduction. There's a lot to be said about DevOps. It's a whole job in itself. Okay, let's talk about the pubs database because it's a teeny database. When I started, I first introduced 7.0, okay, with the pubs database. Why choose it? It's a very simple toy database to show you what to do, but it has some interesting things we can talk about. It has like a couple stored procedures, views, etc. So we can get into refactoring some code, but we can also show you how to use a tool to do some of it and what's might be the pitfalls that you see in the tool, okay? So what are the tasks? First, we want to script out the table, script out the data, right? And then convert the SQL code, right? So, and you can see this is not too many tables here. And if we click the next one, we want to do an inventory, right? Well, how do you do an inventory in SQL Server, right? Well, we can go ahead and run a report, right? So we can do the report here. And we can see there's only a handful of databases, right? There's 8 rows right here. Per objects, but if we go back here, we can count. I think there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I want to say 11, but 3 plus 3 plus 3 is 9, 10, 11. Yeah, it's 11 tables there. So we can see over here there's a bunch of other system, databases or, user database I have here for different things I've talked about in the past, but we are focusing on the pubs one. We can see it's very tiny, right? It's only 16 megabyte. And basically we can see that, if we looked at it, wasn't even looking at it. It's 11 tables, 1 view, 1 trigger, a stored procedure. So we got some interesting things to talk about. Primary foreign constraints, a default constraint, and a check constraint. So it's a small enough database, but it's a good enough example of the surface area that you might see when converting a database from one source to another. So basically SQL Server to basically PostgreSQL. Okay. So again, like I said, converting the table edition is very simple. So there's several options. You can look around for third-party products, use freeware, or recode the DDL by hand. The one I'm going to go is this one right here, SQL Server to PGS. It's a Perl script I found. It's easy to use, so I'm going to demo it today. There's another thing called the Python class out there, SQL Glot. I haven't looked at it. Supports 18 different dialects. I'm going to show you how to do it with the Perl script. So let's stop and do a demo. So if you're going to use Postgres, you're going to be using this tool called pgadmin, okay? And it is a really cool thing that you can do. I'm going to show you right here. You can drop schemas. Good and bad. Right? So it not only drops all your views, your stored procedures, etc., it drops everything. Just making sure I'm in pubs because I don't want to delete it anywhere else. But before I do it, I'll show you, hey, by the way, I did have some data. We're going to rebuild this from scratch. So here's authors, right? And then if I go here and I can go to SQL, this will generate it here. And there's a table space and there's, who owns it and so on. And tools, and we can do the query tool, and then I can do, okay, where it tells me I'm in pubs. Now, this is something interesting to note, is that unlike SQL Server, once you make a connection using the query tool, you cannot change it, okay? So I can't change it and create a new text connection. So I'm in at least the right place, pubs, right? And now I can do select star from DBL, which is the schema, dot authors, okay? Hit enter, or I always want to do control enter, and guess what? We got some data. It's 23 rows, nothing big. So let's delete the schema. Okay, so I'm gonna drop this schema. Delete, drop. Yes. Okay. Excuse me. Don't save. And if we come up here and let's see, refresh. DBL. Did it drop it or not? It's still there. Oh. Let me make sure that. Okay. So all I'm gonna do is I'll just drop the whole database. It's fine too. There you go, going. So let's talk about what you get when you install SQL on that Postgres. You get a Postgres database, and it's kind of like the master. It has a bunch of extensions in it and schemas and so on. You can learn all about it. Math is a thing that I was telling you, the prime numbers. A lot of times I talk about that, but then there's two others. We got the Azure system and maintenance. So the Azure sys is where query store would be going, and maintenance, it's these two databases. Guess what? They're used by the service. Don't mess with them. So if we take a look at the pubs database, we can see it's here. We can also, if you remember, under task, right, we can script it out, right? So if I know where I'm going, which is task, generate scripts. Now, there's a couple things we want to do. We want to not select the whole database. We just want to do tables, right? And that's it. And hit next. And if I continue this, we're basically going to get the file that I'm going to show you right here, which is code intermediate. No. Right here, SQL Server dump. Okay. Now, one of the things you're going to find is that the tool that I used does not handle user-defined types, okay? So they had like create type and its employee ID. And basically what I did is I had to do a search and replace to say, hey, wherever it said, definition of, let's see if I can find one, 11 and 6, right? So 9, right? 9 was way here. So this one, employee ID, that type was probably used here. Okay. And what I did is I just went and changed it to char9. It's not a big change, but it's one of those changes you have to do. Once that's created, okay, and again, hit no, close this. We basically need to run the command. So I'm gonna open up 2 things and I'll show you what we're gonna do. So the very first thing is, this is an open command. So basically it says, hey, copy to the directory on the desktop. Then what it's doing, it's setting the path for the bin object for the Perl because we need to know where Perl is. And then we're starting, okay? As for the run, what we're going to do is we're going to take in that Perl script that does all the conversion, give it the dump file, and it's going to create 3 files, which are kind of smart, right? The before file basically says, hey, create me everything without constraints because we know constraints are a problem when loading data. After file, create me everything with the constraints. And the unsure file, there's going to be a couple things it doesn't understand. We're going to have to fix by hand, okay? So if we hit the open command, we can go ahead and we can type a run.cmd. And what it's going to do is it's going to go through here and it's actually going to do conversion. So it's done now. And we can look and we can see, hey, yeah, it's today's date, right? See it right here, 7/11. And it sounds like a quick grocery store, mini mart. And so we can open these. Let's take a look. Get rid of run command. Okay, so let's do the before. So the before, interesting. So it's going to set some errors handling begin on, and then what it's doing, it's creating everything. Here's the thing. By default, everything should be in lowercase for PostgreSQL. It's case sensitive, okay? I see a lot of things with PostgreSQL that way. Also, double quotes means, hey, by the way, it's identifier, right? So you can see how you do it. Double quotes all over the place. But everything else we see here, it's pretty much what we've seen before. So there's really no changes we need, okay? This one, other than not being commented well, right? This is actually showing us, hey, it's creating a sequence instead of, hey, by the way, it might be an auto num, right? Auto increment, identity. And so we have the sequence there. And so it creates it, and it's owned by jobs.jobid. And we can see that there's pretty much the same thing. There's also here's a default. Here's a default. Oh, guess what? Here, this is using the sequence right here. So jobs.jobid says next value. So this is kind of like, sequences in SQL Server when they add them. I think it was 2012 or before that, Oracle, if you used through Oracle. What didn't get deployed? These are all the things that actually are broken that we have to fix, okay? So let's go take a look. This syntax is wrong, okay? So I'm going to leave that up. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to the intermediate, and these are the ones I showed you, the code. So remember, when we deploy this, there's some third-party tools out there. Redgate has one that's called Flyway. There's another one that's totally free. It's called Liquid Base. Basically, what they do is they take a encryption of the file that you want to run or statements, runs them, and then puts it in a dictionary and says, hey, yeah, I created a database. Don't run that again. So now we can actually automate the deployment of this, okay? So if we go take a look, we can see that we basically drop the database if it exists. There's a little syntax different with force. It forces it, and then we can create the database, and we can give PostgreSQL the ownership. Now, PostgreSQL is kind of like SA, okay? So again, this is something we have to fix. Let's go back to the slide deck and make sure I'm not going too far ahead. Okay, so we did do the conversion, but we know there's still more work to be done, right? We need to not only fix the constraints, but that also did not do any code. So manually, we have to fix the code, right? So let's talk about database tools before I start using them, okay? Did show you a little about pgadmin. It's a tool like SSMS. Inside there's also something called PSQL, which is the interactive command line tool. It's like SQL command. How can you schedule stuff? Well, there's something called PG Agent, which is an extension for a virtual machine. Or you can enable something like Cron, which is the Azure service, okay? What type of drivers? Say, we talked about it's a 3-step process. Inventory, well, maybe 4 steps, but let's get into it. First, inventory is your first step. Second thing is deployment of the infrastructure is your second step, right? Third thing is scripting out the tables in the constraints, deploying the tables. But then once the tables are deployed, say you're doing a migration, you need to move the data, right? So if your company is very familiar with SSIS, why not? You got an ODBC driver, right? If you're going maybe from Oracle and everything's written in Java, you got a JDBC driver. So you got to write some code to move the data, okay? So the first step we showed you is to create the database, create the schema, and create some tables. I chose to use the Azure SQL database flexible server. Cool thing is defined without the constraints. That means I can do inserts or move the data. Postgres supports public schema instead of DBO. So if you wanted to follow along with their, syntax or their nomenclature, okay, then you could say, hey, I want to do public dot author. But the problem is if you get an application that's already written that's looking for DBO, well, got to put DBO out there. Otherwise, you're not only moving the database and converting it, but you're also having to fix the front end too. What's different? There's something called the table space that allows you to put files in different places, kind of like a file group in SQL Server. Problem is when you use platform as a service, flexible service, you don't get to do that, okay? However, if you use IaaS, you get to do it. So let's create this schema and empty tables. So I'm going to go back to here. We notice this is something that has to be fixed. We'll fix that in the future. We notice there's no database here, so let's go ahead and remember I told you it's very important when you open up the query to pick the right database. So if by mistake I hit math, okay, and I did the piece SQL tool, picked the wrong one. That's the P-SQL tool I want to do query. Okay, guess what? We're in a math database. That's not where we want to be. To define a database, we really need to be in Postgres, like, master. So I'm going to close this, go back to here, file, tools, query tool. Going to open up, create database. Now, if I run both of them, it's going to fail because it's kind of weird. It thinks it's a the same block of code, even though, there's no go statement here. Can get away with it. Says pubs does not exist, so can't drop it, right? I'm going to create a new pubs database and give it to the default user, Postgres, and now it's there. So now if we hit refresh, and it's kind of like something similar we do in SSMS, we got a new database, pubs, it's empty. Okay, so I'm going to close this, going to go in the pubs database. Now I'm going to start the tool, the query tool from the pubs database. And I'm going to pull in the create tables and schemas. So we can see that it's the same thing you've seen before, except for now I'm going to drop schema, I'm going to create schema, then I'm going to do a begin, and I'm just running through all the code you saw in commit. So I just cleaned it up. That's all I did. So we've run this. Did it do it or not? Yeah, schemas. Yes, it did. And tables. There we go. So it did it. But the problem now is if we go here, we see this as authors. If we go ahead and add another query window, I just want to query it, right? And let's say select star from DBO dot authors. And we run this. We can see there's no data. So, okay, great. We got the schema. data problem. This is a toy database. We're going to do inserts, right? So it's very simple. If it wasn't a toy database, then pick your ETL tool of choice, write some code to read from source, write to target, constraints not applied. If you do it wrong and you apply the constraints and suddenly it fails, then you know there's an issue. Make sure you do the constraints in the right order. That's usually a good thing. Let's open up the query tool. I'm going to load the next module. So next module is, default constraints. So we have to apply that too, remember? Because if we insert something and there's no default for it, it could be an issue, right? So and there's also, remember sequences, right? So we got a sequence for job ID. Okay. It's interesting that it can be owned by DBO jobs.job ID. So that's interesting. This is pretty much similar syntax we've seen in the past, right? So there's nothing there. Oop, current date's different, right? That looks more like a Spark date than something that we've seen before. But other than that, pretty straightforward, right? So I'm going to run this one. Okay, now I got all the data. I meant the default constraints in. Now we can load it. If you're doing ETL, you do ETL here. Right now, basically, I just took the data that I had, I scripted it out. Cool thing, there's a raised notice, just puts it out there and says, hey, I did something. Then you can say, now, this is something that, let me see where it is. Yeah. Here's the interesting thing about blocks of code and programming in PostgreSQL. What language do you think it's written in? You still with me, Ross?
Yeah, still here.
And so what language is everything written in PostgreSQL?
Is
And
it, what's that?
I'm letting you answer. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, it's written in,
It's written
I
in
was going to
whatever
say
you feel like.
PGSQL.
Yeah, but it's whatever you feel like writing in it. Because it supports multiple languages, unfortunately, right? And so that makes the coding a little more difficult, right? So the reason why we're doing here, this is almost like MySQL, we have code blocks and we have a do, and this $insert1 is basically signaling, hey, it's the beginning of a block. It's some code, run it. But it doesn't know what the code is, right? And it starts reading this up, but it has to go to the end of the block. And this one says, hey, by the way, I want to use PGSQL. Okay. And basically it says, oh yeah, so these are all SQL statements. And then everything in here has to be a valid SQL statement. But it doesn't mean it could have been Python. It could have been Perl. I think those two are actually supported. And again, we'll find out. But other than that, everything else is the same. So this is pretty much like if you dumped it from the original file, and again, you'll get the original file, but if we go back to this intermediate, do we have the original? Maybe not here. This is the dump. That's the Perl script. If you're curious, take a look at the Perl script. This is all the code that I'd probably one day take to convert it to Postgres. I meant PowerShell. I don't see it here. I know it's in the dump up top. So if I minimize this and I go to community.
Well, I was going to
Power
ask if
Talks.
it supported PowerShell.
Does not support PowerShell, but I'll talk to you in a minute. It does do a couple of syntaxes, and I think it's Python and Perl's at least two of them. Excuse me. COVID's coming back on me. Where is it? Moving to Postgres. Code. Before, after, intermediate state. Is this it? No, that's intermediate state. It might be the one before the migration. Yeah, here we go. So this is the original, excuse me, code that you get from Microsoft, right? See, 1994 to 2000. So that's why it was those I was talking about. And you can see this is all the code that it automatically did. But no, I did is I basically took these and plopped them in. Any code changes, I just manually did, okay? So without that saying, you can go through the list and say, hey, yeah, this where John had to change something. But if we run this and it works correctly, look at this. Wow, that's quick. It says, hey, start insert data for authors, close it. If there's any errors, it would tell you. So now I have data. So if we went back to a new query using the query tool and did a select star from dbo.authors, we should have some data now. Problem is we don't have any of the good stuff like referential integrity, and we don't have foreign and primary keys, but we also don't have any code, right? So we're going to work on that. So let's go back to the slide deck and see what else we should be doing. Hey, what happened? High presentation view. Okay. So we talked about that. Migrate data. So many ways to move it. So today I'm going to show you the two ways. The pub is so small, we just created insert statements and I just changed them over. Another one's SSIS, but you could use anything to migrate the data. So you have the old system, you got the new system, you just basically got to migrate the data after you have tables. Modernizing code. This is the hardest part, right? And here's some differences to be aware of. Remember I said that the database, names is case sensitive? It's also what's being stored is case sensitive, okay? Also, multiple languages. We talked about PGSQL, which is their SQL language. TCL, I never used it. I've been programming forever. I have no idea what it does. Perl, so I used it. Python, cool. There's a cool set of stuff that is not supported by other stuff I've seen. For instance, data types. You can do arrays. Okay. There's also different statements that you might see that you might have incurred, in other languages, and there's variable scoping you have to worry about. And last but not least, there's a ton of different indexes, btrieve, hash. You can read all and more about them. Again, like I said, I've only used this for 6 months, so I'm not an expert at it, nor claiming to be. I'm just trying to teach you what I went through to do a migration. But if you go back, we have 4 store procedures, 1 view and 1 trigger. So I suggest using PGSQL because I'm a SQL guru, try it. So let's redesign the code and let's also apply those constraints that we're still missing, try it. So if we did this correctly, I'm hoping I did. Okay. I'm going to go to tools, the query tool, and I'm going to apply the foreign keys and primary keys. So let's go to, we did this one, constraints, apply referential integrity. Okay. So these are pretty straightforward, okay? There's no changes needed here, right? So I'm going to run this. Awesome. Next tool, or script. And again, the way I did this in scripts, we could put this down in liquid base and, run it script by script and it will suddenly work. So we did tuples, referential. Now we're going to do check constraints. And this is where I said there had to be some work. And let's take a look at what's in here versus this. We can see that max level less than 50, syntax different, right? We have to put quotes around names. Other than that, looks pretty straightforward, okay? This one says alike. There's no such thing as alike. There's a reg expression alike. And the syntax is a little different here. See, this one actually has double quotes around it. And you had to quote the name. But other than that, it looks pretty much the same. This one's a more complex one, right? We're doing where the pub ID is in this, or there's a reg expression, right? And so we can see there's something similar there. Not too much of a difference, right? And then this one has the FM, so on, right? It's another check. And again, it's nothing to write home about. That one, again, it's using regex like. So when you're doing check constraints and if you're doing any patterns, then you're probably going to do some work. Also, anything with names, those brackets don't hold here, so you're going to have to convert them to quotes, okay? We'll run this, and everything's working so far. So we're getting there. It's pretty good. Let's talk about code, right? So let's open the tool. query tool, and let's bring up the code and talk about what was different. Okay, so there's the store procedure. Okay, and we can see that create view as, right? We know we don't have to drop it, but if you want to rerun it, it's repeatable, okay? And there's nothing different there. I didn't use quotes on there. Don't have to when I'm not defining anything, but it's there. And now if I select it, okay, and we bring it up, okay, why did it not do that? Why did it not give me output? That is weird. Let me open another window. Demo gods are not with me. I'm the right one. Try PUBG, I am. I must have hit something to turn off. So you get your things here, like you can analyze stuff. This you analyze it, but the thing is, it's not showing the output, and that's the problem. So I must have hit something to do that. There we go. Okay, so analyze it. It tells you kind of like the query analyze it, right? But data output. If I run this, that's your query plan, but I want to run it without it. There you go. So it actually brought back the view, and it brought back the data we had, okay? If we look at the view, it's just basically joining the two tables, that's all. So author is the title author to titles, and there's no filtering, okay? First one. This is an interesting one, right? We just want to select from the title author where the royalty equals a percentage, okay? So first, again, we want to drop it, create it again. The easy way to return it, there's different syntax, and you're going to have to try them all, is you just say, hey, I'm going to return a table and describe the table. So I'm going to return a table of IDs, which are bar chart 11. As for function is your marker for the code block, right? Begin. It's going to return a query of select from the author ID from title author where the royalty equals a percentage. So basically that's our function. So we're going to drop it and recreate it. Okay. And now if we run this guy and I bring this guy up, guess what? We have two authors that actually have a royalty percentage of 30. Okay. And we can look that up. I'll let you do that in your time. So can we do some advanced stuff like roll-ups? And the answer is yes, we can. Okay. So this one is a function, doesn't take anything, but returns back a publisher's ID and average price. And what it does is it says when grouping, if it's one, that's all, otherwise give me the publisher ID and average price. So it's going to do a roll-up. Okay. And that's kind of cool because that's a more advanced SQL feature, right? Did I do something wrong? Let me see. Excuse me. Can I run this? Okay, just highlighted the wrong thing. And then we run the test right here. And what we should be able to do is we get some roll-ups, right? So we can see this, the publisher ID, his average price for books is $9 and change. Another ID, $8.77, $15 and change. All of them roughly around $14 books, okay? That one works pretty good. This store procedure is the same thing, almost similar. It does a roll-up, but then it does a couple levels, right? And if you're curious, I'll just run it. Excuse me. Okay. So that's why it said it's skipping it. And now if we run it, we should get the results. And we do. So now we get a bunch of types like business and then a publisher ID and then the year-to-date sales. Kind of cool. Last but not least, another more complex one, which has a bunch of parameters now coming in because the other ones, basically, we didn't have any parameters. We just called it, right? So not really that dynamic. This one's a lot more dynamic, right? Because now we have parameters. We'll run this one. And now we can say, hey, guess what? Give me any psychology books between $10 and $20, basically. And guess what? We can see the books. And how about any business books between $2.25 and $9.99? Get some more books. I wish these prices were still around because I don't see them around. Okay, so far the syntax is a little different. Nothing really weird. This is where the weirdness comes in. There's going to be some things, and again, I haven't showed you all the things I know in Postgres. Triggers are really weird, okay? So when you define a trigger, you first define a function to do the trigger. Okay, so we're going to drop not only the trigger, if it was existed on the employee, but we dropped the function. We created a new function called insert update, returns trigger, to clear our record. And what it does is it says, give me the record, okay, insert an R from employee jobs, right? Where the job ID and employee ID match. And there's some requirements, right? This is what was the code before, like if job ID equals 1, or it's not equal to 10, it tells me an error. Otherwise, guess what? These levels match. Again, another error. Otherwise, it does what it needs to do, okay? So now we're going to find the trigger, and I'm going to show you what it looks like because it's not really attached yet, right? So we're going to run this. Okay, and now we look. So trigger functions are here. So we get this employee insert and update. That's what it does. But if we look at, the employee table, okay, and look at triggers, there's no trigger on it yet, okay? So what we need to do now is when you say create employee trigger after insert or update, for each row, we're going to run this. So this is different, okay? Remember, when you do a trigger in SQL Server, you have the insert, right, and delete tables, right, and you can query from them. This one runs through the whole table, and for each record, it runs this, okay? So we're going to run this trigger here, and now we're going to insert it and see what happens. So we're going to insert in here, and it said, hey, erased line 22, right? Why is that? Well, because job ID 1 must be level 10. Well, doesn't work. And that's my sister's name, by the way. And this one's job ID 2. If I run this, and again, this is causing an issue because it must be between here, right? So we can definitely, delete from employee why did I do this? Select jobs. I don't know why I did this, but I'll show you it works by just modifying it, right? So we can see that this one is the insert, right? And which one is it? Just insert into employee. So let me double check the columns. First name, job ID, and level. So the level is 9 here, right? So we need to change this to 10. So if we change this to 10 and run it, it should work fine. And there you go. And now we have a new record in there, my sister's name. Valerie Minor. Okay, cool. So we talked about redesign code. I'm going to try to wrap this up because I want to try to keep it down to roughly an hour. Okay, so let's try to present a view. Okay, so what's different? System access, right? Usually in system, you create a user, you create a login, right? There's no such thing. And again, a database without users, well, maybe it's a DBA Nirvana, no one's bugging you, but it's not that useful, right? Postgres only supports roles. And what's the difference between a regular role and a role that allows you to log on? It's just a log on permission, okay? So demo 5, creating users. Let me soon, I want to skip over that and see if we can come back to it. Let's talk about something that is kind of weird about Postgres that you have to kind of know about, and why Postgres might not be good for things that get updated a lot, okay? So how does it keep track of multi-version controls, right? In the past, you have locking, right, and blocking. Readers, writers block readers, right, and depending upon isolation levels, so on, right? So if we look here, we select start from movies where name equals Shaolin Wu Tang, right? We can see that if there's an update happening, right, we might have a version here, Wu Tang, and then I'm trying to get this, see which one is here. Okay, so there's two versions. We can see the very first versions in the first page, right? And the second version's here. So what the problem is that with this version control, we're never deleting anything until the vacuum happens, right? And says, hey, it's not being used anymore. So we might be making an update to change the name, right, from Shaolin Wu Tang, but at the same time is we might be querying the old version while the new version's being updated, right? So what's the issue? The multivariate concurrency database uses pen-only storage with an auto vacuum, right? Why do we not like that? Garbage collection always causes stuff, right? Issues. We have to keep a full copy of the tuple in memory, so we have the old version and new. This results in table bloat. Also, in index, we actually, if we're storing that piece of information index, now we have to duplicate that bloat and index, right? Also, the auto vacuum process is required. What's better? Yeah, it's just a different way, a 1980s way of dealing with concurrency control. Instead of blocking and having different types of isolation, we're using a pen-owned storage. Did anyone do it better? Oracle and MySQL store deltas versus the full tuple, so it takes a lot less space. Okay. System monitoring. So once we deploy it, we need to monitor the systems, right? How do you do it? There's the query store if you decide to deploy to the Azure portal, right? For IaaS, you can use something called pgstat statements, which is the extension. Like I told you, I'm old school. I've been doing this for 30 years. I just write a log table, break the code into restartable chunks with temp tables or whatever you're using, and then start timings. And then I can tell you how long everything takes, right? Regardless of technique, it's important to collect this information so that when someone says, hey, the store procedure is running before in 1 minute, now it's running in an hour, you can figure out what's going on. Other topics. This is stuff for you to take home and do some homework. It supports replication, pub sub. Full text indexing. Full text indexing is really cool. It does vectors. Remember I talked to you about Ray's vectors and indexing, and you can actually see how the information's converted into numbers, right? It's really kind of cool. You're kind of handling the stuff that you do full text indexing in SQL Server more at a lower level, okay? High availability. So we have synchronous replication in the standby server. I talked about geo extensions. I talked about how to deploy it, right? If I want to do schema drift, I'm changing the schema, how do I do it? Could use liquid base. Hey, run the script, fixes it. Run environment A, environment B. Liquid base uses a hash key in a table to keep track of it, okay? Nice thing is backups are handled by service, but if you're doing the virtual machine, then you must roll your own. I do not like the backups. Backups is basically just a dump of SQL statements. Not the best I've ever seen. I like how Microsoft does it with, just backing up the pages, but again, it's free. So the vacuum service basically handles the fragmentation when we get bloat. High availability, just push button. They have head logging. When you push a button, guess what? It suddenly does a zone redundant for at least Azure. So you have two data centers close to each other, and it just synchronizes. Summary. So I haven't heard anyone ask any questions. So at this point, I'll ask anyone have questions.
Yeah, one thing that I've noticed is that recovery of PostgreSQL compared to SQL Server is very, very clumsy.
Yep.
You're not recovering a database, you're recovering the entire instance. If you've got an instance of Postgres with 5 databases on it, then and you have to recover the wall, which is the write ahead log, is at the instance level. So if you're recovering to an hour ago, you're recovering the entire instance. All 5 databases on there will be recovered to as of an hour ago. So that leads me up to a question, and I don't know if you've heard of this or not. Have you heard of any product out there that will generate backout SQL so that I accidentally do a delete?
Yep.
I can generate inserts for that accidental delete.
Interesting. You can do it in SQL Server. I don't know if you can do it in Postgres. And if you're curious, I'll show you really quickly. Take a look at this article. I don't know if you can retrofit this to Postgres. I wrote an article called Audit and Prevent Unwanted SQL Server Changes. And what it does, it actually uses triggers at the table level, and it creates XML, if I remember right, and stores that XML. So, and then you can query the XML to reverse it. So a delete's an insert, right? An update is another update. An add is a delete, right?
Right.
And so you can do all that. Just read through the article. Let me show you. Yeah, so see right here, this insert generated the XML for the data. And since you have all the data, you can just back it out now. So I don't know, but that might be something you can look into.
Okay.
Can you script out all the records with stop sharing? Can you script out all the records into a format like JSON or XML that's easily queryable? And then, we already told you the rules, right? To reverse it, right? So yeah, I don't like the backup. I'll ask Grant Fritchie too, because I haven't talked to him in a while. He used to be the user group leader, and I took over from him in Rhode Island, but I know he's doing a lot more than that. I do a ton of Spark nowadays, Spark SQL, Python coding, and they don't let me add databases anymore. I don't know why. I'm good at it, but they just don't let me add databases. Let me wrap up, and then I'll ask again one more question round, and then if there's no more questions, we'll call it. So why do this, right? You have to think about the amount of money it's going to cost to do this versus the amount of money you're going to save in the future, right? And sometimes, it doesn't matter about the money. If your higher up manager says this is the path we're taking, then you're going down that, right? Cool thing about PostgreSQL, right? It's an open source product available on all 3 vendors. You can eliminate the licensing costs if you don't use platform as a service. Okay. We talked about the methodology for migrating a historical SQL Server database to the cloud. So basically, inventory, is there any dependencies, migrate the tables, load the data, install the constraints, redeploy rewritten SQL code. There's many tools to help you on the journey. I suggest using a PL or PG-SQL language, not any other language, because it's just going to be more complex, at least for me. Multi-version concurrency control. If you have a ton of inserts and reads at the same time, then you might have some performance. You might see like everything spiking up and then go down and then spike up again. And that's because, things slow down because you got bloat, and once the bloat's away, it's quick. Basically just add the skill sets to make yourself more marketable, because more you know, more marketable you are, right? Just go quickly over this. There's a ton of references here. So Perl conversion script, Perl client tools, DevOps tools, history, JDBC driver, ODBC, about indexes, about the language, about multi-version control, statement statistics, query store we talked about, replication full text indexing, high availability, the GIS extension. Excuse me, I'm still getting over COVID. And the last two things, liquid base and five-way, which allow you to do it. So let's get back to that main question. The main question, is it worth it? Okay. The client I had, and I can't tell you their name, but I warned them ahead of time before we went down this road that it was going to cost a lot of money, because it's going to take more money to rewrite everything bad code than just move the data and create schemas, right? And so if you took a consultant's rate and estimated each database took, say, 4 weeks to convert, and then you looked at how much you were saving in licensing costs by not using SQL Server versus using Postgres, it would take years to get back the money, right? Now, if you're a company and you have on-staff developers that are going to be working on this, so it's a fixed price, then yeah, this is something that you can do. But if you decide to go out there and hire help to do it, then it might be cost prohibitive to, move from one system to another, and meaning databases, right? So with that said, I'm kind of wrapping up. Is there any questions?
Will you share your slide deck with me?
Yeah, go back to the chat, and if you go up to the community link I sent you, click
Uh-huh.
on that, and everything that I just showed you is there.
Oh, okay.
And if you can't get it, give me a holler.
We'll do. Thank you.
No worries.
And thank you for presenting to us.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so
Great.
much. This was great.
Yeah. They so before everybody goes, we're not meeting next month. That next month we would normally meet is my wedding anniversary, and yeah, I won't be here.
You'll be taking care of business.
That's true. So the month after that, September, Ed Leighton Dick will be presenting to us for a topic to be named later. So that's the what do they call them? PSAs, public service announcements.
Public service announcement.
So yeah, thank you, John. Really appreciate it. It was
Yeah,
great,
thanks, John.
great talk, great presentation.
I
I
will.
Thank
learned
you
a
for having
ton.
me.
I will, John, let you know that maybe this will make it a little easier on you. It's not called Azure SQL DB Flexible Server. It's called Azure Database for Postgres Flexible
Okay.
Server. So it confused me for a while too. Maybe they had an older name. I don't remember what the old. I still thought the old one was Azure Database for or Azure Database for PostgreSQL, but
Yep.
I don't know. So maybe that'll make it easier to say, because I get confused when people say, "Oh, Azure SQL." I'm like, well, which one are you talking about?
MySQL, PostgreSQL,
Right.
SQL Server. But you know what? Google does the same thing. They call it Google Cloud SQL, and then you have to pick your flavor.
Yeah.
Cool. Hey, if you get to talk to Bill Fletcher, tell him I said hi, and same thing with Ed. And thank you for having me. And
Will do.
talk to you when I see you.
Yeah.
All
thanks
right.
So much.
All right, John. Thank you.
Take care.
You too.
And Ross, don't forget to stop the recording.
Oh, thank you.
And you have to cut a bunch of the front because that was all the talk we're talking. You got 2 hours.
Oh, we didn't record that part. So.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye.